Good evening. I'm seeing a lot of faces that I have not seen in a long time. This is a great evening. I am Sherwin. I'm the board president of the Arts and Humanities Council, and I want to welcome everyone here to the 15th Annual Island Treasure Award. It was in 1999 that the members of the Arts Council recognized the need to acknowledge and reward those in our community who were doing an outstanding job in the many fields of art and humanities. The intent was to single out people whose body of work displayed a unique voice and vision, as well as an ongoing commitment to their chosen field. Rather than focusing on a few who might have already achieved national recognition, we would shine our spotlight on those less well-known, those who have constantly inspired their peers, and who have offered the community at large a different way of seeing ourselves and the world around us. As we were figuring out how to structure this award program, we looked at the way the MacArthur Foundation conducted its Genius Award, and we adapted their procedures to fit our needs. We adopted wholeheartedly their emphasis upon anonymity, no one knows, was to become our mantra. And that still applies now. To everyone involved in the process, the 10 nominators, whose purpose our candidates propose our candidates each year with the 5 jurors who select the winners, even the other nominees. We believe this principle has kept our process of selection free from any pressures or politics, and has allowed it to be an authentic representation of the community's choice. Since 1999, we have selected and honored 30 outstanding people in the arts and humanities who met all of our criteria and received unanimous vote from the jury. A number of these treasures are with us tonight. The women are wearing crowns and the men wearing silver lapel pins. Would you please stand up so we can acknowledge? Well, now let's get on to the awards. Each year, the winners are asked, from the previous year, are asked to read a statement for our new honorees. Unfortunately, last year's winner in the arts, John Paul Jones, is unable to be with us tonight. He is involved with the Native American Film Festival that's taking place in Southern California. So, our winner from the year before, George Shannon, will make the first presentation. George was honored in 2012 for his great contribution as a children's librarian, a storyteller, a writer of irresistible books for children. George will be presenting the award to poet and poetry advocate John Willson. George?
Well, I'm delighted to be John Paul's stunt double. It's a first. If you ask John Willson what, as a child, he wanted to be when he grew up, he will tell you a writer for the Pony Express. The idea of a man racing across the country on horseback to deliver an urgent message was a compelling image for John as a boy. But then, in relating this story, John often goes on to joke, well, that as a poet and a bookseller, he didn't exactly realize his dream. The members of the Island Treasure Award beg to differ. There is a line in a poem by William Carlos Williams that seems relevant here. Williams wrote, "It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. It is difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." As a poet, John Willson brings us that news. He delivers messages about what it means to be human at this time and in this place, to enjoy an hour of peace in the garden or endure the panic outside an operating room. While John may not do it on horseback, he does accomplish his task with the break of a line, the turn of a page, the click of a computer mouse. John is a poet to whom the visual world, both the world of nature and the world of art, is a source of inspiration and comfort. His love of the natural world was prompted early on by a childhood spent largely outdoors in Southern California, and then extended and made more complex and interesting by time spent in Scotland and Japan and life in the Pacific Northwest. John credits his introduction to the visual arts to his older brother Dave, who lived in Washington, D.C., and took the visiting kid brother to the halls of the National Gallery and turned him loose. There, in what John has called his second home, the boy began an ongoing dialogue with the impressionistic painters and developed a lifelong fascination with the work of Salvador Dali, especially Dali's craftsmanship, draftsmanship, and attention to detail. It was in college at Lewis and Clark that John met his first real practicing poet, Vern Restala. He began taking workshops and writing his own poems. In class, he was taken with the works of Gary Snyder and Theodore Roethke. He was also taken with a classmate, Kim, whom he married the year they graduated. And from what I heard, swiftly took her off to Japan. After college, John began sending his poems out into the world. One of his first published works was awarded the Pushcart Prize and printed in their anthology, No Slim Feet. Since then, he has been honored by many other organizations, including the Academy of American Poets, the Pacific Northwest Writers Conference, and the Artists Trust of Washington. If you ask John how he and Kim came to live on Bainbridge Island, he says, we backed up into it. I'm going to see the footnotes. But we are the lucky ones. Once here, John Davis introduced him to the poetry workshops that existed here at the time, led by Nancy Rico and Bob McAllister. Soon, John became part of the poetry community. Encouraged by Sue Hyland of the Parks Department, John established his own workshops that have continued now for over 20 years. In them, John emphasizes a positive environment for creativity and addresses two essential elements: the mechanics of poetry, line breaks, word choice, stanzas, etc., and also the emotional component. John's concern has always been helping his students move a poem along in the world by emphasizing the importance of patience, of spending time with the work, and living with it so that the work can mature through revisions over time and reach its receiver in the finest, clearest form. John's nominator writes, John's stubborn dedication to the art of poetry has helped generate and maintain a creative community for both aspiring and seasoned poets. Besides his own chapbook titled The Sun We Had, John has published scores of poems in literary journals across the country, and at Eagle Harbor Books, where he has worked since 1991, he leads and oversees the many outreach tasks that enrich the lives of island readers. These include composing the print newsletter, coordinating the staff picks, and serving as MC for special events. Together with his co-worker, Ann Combs, he established the annual Limericks contest, which has inspired a wide variety of, yes, interesting, not to mention lewd poems, by budding local poets, ranging from children to our governor, then Congressman Jay Inslee. John Willson is a quiet, yet very active man. when he is not engaged in spinning life's straw into poems, he spends a great deal of his time encouraging and mentoring others in the pursuit of poetry. He is dedicated to his craft and inspiring to his community. As one of the longtime participants in his workshop said, his reach may be narrow, but his influence is profound and deep. He may not be racing across the country with spurs and chaps on a pony, but he brings us messages, connections that add meaning to our lives. Now here is John himself, telling a little bit about his life in a short film made by Steve Stolee last December.
I was born in Los Angeles, California, and was the youngest of 5 siblings, and younger by 7 years than my next oldest sibling. So I was the baby of the family, and it's as though I had 3 sets of parents, my 2 sets of siblings and my mom and dad. My mom always referred to me as the dividend. It was the second honeymoon in Cambria, I think, that I was a result of. Somewhere between kindergarten and first grade, we moved to San Diego, California. My father was in the aerospace industry, and he got a new job down in San Diego. And so I really grew up mostly in San Diego. I loved going to the beach down there. I really found a second home at the beach and spent many happy hours in the sunshine, swimming and wave riding with my friends, and it was really a very sunny childhood. My mother was always very supportive of my writing, and she instilled in me very early, I think, a appreciation of literature through her reading to me of Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin and the poetry of Robert Louis Stevenson. I loved that, and I think that the sound of her voice and the rhythm of the poetry gave me an appreciation for the rhythms of that are possible in written expression, and so she's been very important in my life in encouraging that part of my expression. In San Diego, I went to high school and ran track like my father before me, and I excelled in track and was a star, broke the record, the school record in the quarter mile. I ran the quarter mile and the mile relay and the 440 relay. And I think I still have the record in the 440 relay, probably because it's now the 400 meters, so they haven't run it in so long. But that was one of the things that I got from my father. Another thing was the attention to detail and perfectionism that he had in his woodworking and in his photography. He was a very accomplished photographer, as is my sister Sue. And so I think there's something that I got from him of the visual sense in my poetry, and I've always been a visual poet. Well, when I graduated from high school, I really didn't have a clear idea of where I wanted to go to school, although I knew I wanted to stay on the West Coast, and I knew that I wanted to get away from Southern California and stretch my wings a little bit, and a friend had recommended Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, and so that's where I ended up going. And a number of important things in my life happened at Lewis and Clark. I became a student of Vern Ritsala, who is a poet, and he was the first real practicing poet that I had met. It was Vern Ritsala who really stood for me as an example of the fact that you can be a poet and it's a legitimate calling, and you can do it for the rest of your life. It's serious and it's fun at the same time. And the other thing that happened at Lewis and Clark is that I met my wife, Kim, there. Kim is the first reader of all of my poems, and she was from Portland, Oregon. And we, shortly after graduating from college, we were married at her house. It was a 1978, very 70s wedding. I was wearing a Mexican wedding shirt, and she was wearing a Mexican wedding dress. And we were married by our Eastern European literature professor. We met in his class, Eastern European literature class, and fell in love, and were married after college. It was also at Lewis and Clark that I took an overseas study program, and we went to Scotland, a group of us English majors, and I further spread my wings there as a poet. I loved wandering around Edinburgh. I hitchhiked through the Western Isles of Scotland, and I just loved sort of being on my own and discovering myself as a poet there. So that was a tremendous experience. Before I had left on that trip, I had put in my suitcase an abalone shell from San Diego with the intention of presenting it to Salvador Dali, who was my hero, one of my heroes, and whose work I had discovered at the National Gallery. And so after we were finished with the program, I went to Spain and found his house in Port Lligat on the Costa Brava. And I was sitting on a wall above his house with an abalone shell in a plastic bag, and I didn't really even know if he was home or not. And the limousine was parked below me, and inside was Gala, his wife, and I didn't know that Dali himself was in the car until I saw a hand reach over and pat her on the thigh. So at that moment I realized that he was in the car, and the car started, and I had to do something. So I jumped down off the wall and pulled the abalone shell out of the bag and held it up to the windshield of the car, and he motioned me to come around, and his window rolled down, and I presented him with the abalone shell, and he said, "Thank you, it's very beautiful. You paint?" And I said, "No, I write." And he said, "You come visit me and the madame tomorrow at 7 o'clock. So the interim period between that first meeting and my visit with him was one of the most nervous times that I've ever had in my life. And I went the next day, the next evening to see him, and he graciously brought me into his home. I sat in his sort of living room area and watched him work on a wax image of Christ on the cross that was later to be cast in gold. And all the time he was answering the phone, receiving other visitors. Every so often he would get up and sign prints. He would ask me questions from time to time. I had brought him a poem, and he read the poem and said, "Bravo." So I was very pleased with that. I've almost forgotten what poem it was, but that visit was a milestone in my life and sort of further galvanized my relationship to visual arts, and it was just plain exciting to have the opportunity to meet my hero that way. I got my Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the University of California at Irvine. And after I graduated, we were there still in Southern California, and I was doing temporary work in factories and warehouses, and this wasn't really going anywhere for me. And so we decided to go to Japan. So we got jobs teaching English as a second language to Japanese businessmen and government workers, and moved to Japan and lived there for a year and a half during 1983 and 84. And the Japan experience ended up having a significant part in my written output. I have a pretty good handful of poems that come from that Japan experience, and it was a way to really enjoy that culture, which we had always admired for its traditional culture and its gardens and its design sense, and really felt that we had gotten a lot out of that trip. I started out working with a friend, the artist Gary Groves. He came to a poetry reading that I gave down at Linwood Center. There used to be a bakery down there, and I gave a poetry reading that included my Japan poems. And he came to the reading. He had a Japanese wife, and he came up to me and said that he admired my poetry and spoke a little bit about his connection with Japan, and I ended up working for him, doing house remodeling, helping him remodel houses down on the south end of the island. And during our lunch breaks, we would talk about poetry and about art, and that exchange between the verbal and the visual expressions of art is something that I guess had been sort of brewing all through my life, and really came to a very gratifying fruition with my conversation with Gary, and it continues to this day. He's now a woodcut artist, and he and I collaborated on my chapbook, The Sun We Had, which incorporates poems having to do with the passing of my father, also with the breast cancer poems. My wife was a breast cancer patient and is a breast cancer survivor, and that also takes a significant part of my work is devoted to that experience, dealing with her very serious encounter with breast cancer. I think that those three things, looking back from the very poor perspective of the present, the death of my father when I was 13 and the death of my mother a little over a year ago, and my experience, my relationship with Kim, the first reader of my poems, and her, especially her very serious encounter with breast cancer, those three things, with the sort of Kim being the fulcrum, are what go into that manuscript and stand for me as currently anyway, sort of mileposts in my life and experiences that have defined me as a person and as a poet. And what I get out of what I find is solace and redemption and exhilaration in the natural world. I'm a nature poet. If you had to pin me down, I would have to say I'm a nature poet. And in the world of art, in discussing art, relating my work to visual artists and projects that I've enjoyed with visual artists here on the island, including Patty Rogers, with whom I did a series of bookmarks and broadsides, incorporating her images and my poems. And I was also quite honored to be part of Maggie Smith's water mural that went up at the Bainbridge Aquatic Center. She asked me to contribute something, and a very, very tiny excerpt from one of my Japan poems ended up in that water mural. These conversations with visual artists are vital to me, and I think they sort of define my residence, so to speak, as a poet on the island. It's just that part of me that relates to the visual world.
Now, for his work as both a writer and an advocate of poetry, the Bainbridge Island Arts and Humanities Council is delighted to present John Willson with this check and trophy, and declare him an Island Treasure of 2014.
Wow. Which is the more surreal experience? Visiting with Salvador Dali or standing here trembling in these bright lights? I am proud to live in a place where the arts define the community landscape. And I want to thank Cynthia Sears and Frank Buxton and the Bainbridge Arts and Humanities Council for creating and sustaining an award that recognizes not just individuals, but the pool of exceedingly talented people and organizations in the arts and humanities right here on this island. The Arts and Humanities Council has had a hand in a good many of the projects I've been involved with over the years, and I'm grateful for their abiding presence. I look back fondly to when it was just the Bainbridge Arts Council in the late 80s and early 90s, and Janice Queener Shaw would host volunteers for Exhibition Magazine for collating and stapling parties in the basement of her house on Holly Avenue, ably assisted by Janice's 3 Australian shepherds. What a great way to celebrate the resonance between written and visual art. One of my poetry writing workshop members once said, "It takes an island to write a poem." A statement that points to the roles that conversation and community play in the process of poetry. While writing a poem is, at heart, a solitary experience involving the interplay of deep feeling, reflection, and the specifics of one's experience, I believe that the life of a poem, as it goes out into the world, has very much to do with what John Paul Jones, in his acceptance remarks here last year, called the spirit of interchange. And so I share this award with every person over the years with whom I've had a conversation about poetry, a multitude of poets and writers and visual artists and other friends of the arts. If it takes an island to write a poem, how does the poet thank the island where artists and the arts are so seamlessly linked with daily life? An island where my first job was working at remodeling with a carpenter who creates woodblock prints. An island where I've watched my licensed massage practitioner play cello for the symphony. An island where the man who limbed up my fir trees, God bless you, Bob Cedarwall, made a name for himself on and off the boards of the local theater company. An island where my companion on the late Monday night shift at the bookstore, for crying out loud, authored the funniest book on raising a family of 6 here in the 70s. And so, in gratitude, I come to a poem. Not a poem composed for this occasion, but probably the truest Bainbridge Island poem I've written. It takes place right over the ridge from here, on Upper Farms Road, in the area of the old country club. On the surface, it involves a dead sea lion washed up on the beach. Deeper, and in light of this occasion, it touches closely on the role that friendship plays in the creation of a poem and in the life of the arts on this island. It has to do with the gift economy that Lewis Hyde says is the essence of exchange in the arts of a society. Simply put, a friend called me on the phone asking for advice. I gave him the advice, and he, in his way, gave me the poem. A fruitful exchange within the context of everyday life from which art arises. Life becomes poetry through conversation. That friend was fellow poet John Davis, the first Bainbridge poet I met. He was phoning me from his parents' house, his parents' summer home, and he was in a predicament. He had something he needed to get rid of, and he wanted to know where he could purchase netting of the kind used for fishing nets. I couldn't tell him, but together we came up with a solution. This poem is also about ingenuity. A note on the vocabulary here. The term sleep tight is used. Sleep tight originates from back when what we now know as the box spring on a bed was simply a network of ropes tied to the bed frame. The idea is that the tighter these ropes are secured, the firmer the surface would be, resulting in a better night's sleep. It's a poem that attempts to answer the question, what are friends for? And I offer the poem in gratitude tonight, as I did on the occasion of its composition. At this particular juncture, I would like to thank my wife, Kim, the first reader of all my poems. Thank you, Kim. The title of the poem is the first line, You Call with a Dead Sea Lion, for John Davis. You call with a dead sea lion, 4 feet long on your beach, and concerned about the backyard funeral tomorrow for the dowager next door, neighbors have noted the stench. No state agency will touch it. Tides won't bear it away. Rubber gloved, you tried rolling it. Found what gravity lives in sloughing flesh. And you thought of a shroud made of netting, towed out to the channel, anchored with cinder blocks. Wondering how a broad black nose, flared whiskers and fins decompose. I can't tell you where to find the material, whether one buys it by the yard, but wait. In our garage is a hammock. A hammock we haven't strung for 3 houses, wanting the right pair of trees. Take it, friend. Cinch it until brown fur stands out in rectangles. And may your boat's engine catch at the cord's first pull. May the weight sink swiftly on release. And may we all sleep tight. I'll leave it on the driveway. Finally, after rolling my eyes countless times when Oscar winners have said the following. It's time to say it myself with heart. This one's for you, Mom. Thank you.
Tonight's second award will be presented by Cynthia Harrison, who was chosen as an Island Treasure in 2013, but also has been honored as a Librarian of the Year by the New York Times and celebrated for all she did to elevate our beloved Bainbridge Library to be the gem of the KIPSAP library system and possibly the most important cultural organization on our island. Cindy will read the presentation of the award to Janie Ekberg for her achievements as a fiber artist and as the creator of the Camp Siberia program. Cindy.
Thank you, Karen. This may be my last appearance on stage after I try to pronounce these Russian names. But I will do my best. Janie Ekberg has always loved making things, creating designs by putting things together in beautiful and interesting ways. When as a child, she received a small sewing machine, a world of possibilities opened to her. And sewing has been part of her life ever since. Janie knew she wanted to be a fashion designer and make unique and wonderful clothes in New York. But as you will hear, life interrupted her plans and ambitions. She graduated from college with a double major, adding education to her original major of clothing, textiles, and art. For some time after college, Janie taught in high school, focusing on design, although swerving for a time through the subject of nutrition. We are not going to mention her brief stint as a non-artistic bank teller. All during this period, Janie and Chuck were married, and after 7 years, they began their family. Soon after the birth of their first daughter, they moved to Bainbridge. It was here that Janie met a bunch of moms who formed a play group for their children, and then later reformed as a quilting group. Before long, Janie was teaching the quilting group, and then she was offered a solo show at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts. By this time, Janie had discovered the two elements that would ultimately figure in her unique designs. The first was the Seminole patch. First created by Seminole women at the turn of the last century, this is a complicated patchwork made by sewing various widths and colors of fabric strips, or scraps together in long strips, and then cutting those strips into segments and reassembling them. Janie took that concept and ran with it, using her unfailing sense of color and design. The second element Janie discovered and adopted was the serger, the machine that it could overcast the raw edges of fabric with a V-shaped stitch and leave the thread on the outside. The Seminole patch and the serger opened the door to Janie's creative imagination and introduced her signature work in wearable art to the community. By 1986, Janie's one-woman production line had developed into a fabric art company called Calliope and required 12 employees and 2 factories to fill all the orders from 300 stores around the United States. And then Janie discovered Russia. It was Susie Glass-Burdick of BPA who involved Janie in the original cultural exchange between Bainbridge and Novosibirsk and convinced her to join that exchange the following year. It was Susie also who suggested that Janie should start making costumes for BPA productions. When the Russian director from the Globe Theater in Russia visited Bainbridge and saw her costumes for Once Upon a Mattress, he asked Janie if she would be the designer for his next Russian production, Firebird. So Janie went to Russia with bolts of fabric and her serger and spent 3 months creating 180 costumes for the Globe Theater. While in Russia, Janie learned the plight of Russian orphans and started on a path that would lead to creating the Camp Siberia project, a program in which a group of Bainbridge students worked as youth counselors in a summer camp established for orphans in Novosibirsk. The work that Camp Siberia has done for 11 years and that it will continue doing in the future as Camp Siberia Kitezh is philanthropic in nature when considered from the point of view of the Russian orphans. But as the Island Treasure jurors all agreed, when you look at its impact on the students from Bainbridge who take part in this, Camp Siberia is a full immersion, multicultural program in the humanities. After attending seminars to introduce them to Russian culture, these young people depart for a vastly different world. The children they work and play with come from different backgrounds, different expectations, a different experience of life, and they face a very different future. As with the Bainbridge students who go to Ometepe as part of the wonderful Bosia project, the kids who travel to Camp Siberia are lifted out of themselves, out of their familiar worlds and comfortable assumptions. They connect with the Russian children and with one another in a way that will stay with them forever. They also return to the island and talk to their friends, their parents, their neighbors, and the many volunteers who have been involved in this project now and for whom it has expanded their whole idea of the world and their hearts. Janie says that once she met the Russian children, her life changed. Her art became less important to her than the relationships established with those she met in the program. We have to ask, though, are the two really all that different? It seemed to the Island Treasure Committee that Janie has followed a similar path in pursuing both her passions. As a gifted fiber artist, she brings together diverse elements and colors in unique designs. Within the framework of the Camp Siberia program, Janie also joins together diverse elements, Americans and Russians, students and teachers, young kids and older ones, shy kids and bold, a new combination every year, all united in a single exuberant work. All Janie has really changed is her medium. Using friendships rather than fabrics, Janie is creating a cultural quilt that works as a whole while allowing each separate element to shine. She is a treasure. And now let's spend a few moments listening to Janie herself as she talks to Cynthia Sears in this film by Steve Stolee.
I was born in Seattle, and when I was 3, my father went to work for the Atomic Energy Commission in Richland, Washington. So we moved to Eastern Washington, and all of the houses in Richland were A, B, C, D, E, and F houses. So we lived in an E house right across the street from the Columbia River, and the whole neighborhood was filled with boys. And my older brother was my favorite person in the world, and so we played all the time, and I played outside. And there were tumbleweeds, and there were black widows and red ants, and we collected, I didn't even think about this, we collected black widows in a mayonnaise jar because they were so beautiful, and we'd put red ants in, and the red ants would just go flying. And my mother had a heart attack. And I think that's why I'm afraid of spiders. But anyway, we had a wonderful time playing, and I was outside with the boys all the time, and my mother was concerned about me being too much of a tomboy. So she bought me a little Singer sewing machine that I still have upstairs and thought I should learn how to sew. So it clamped onto the table, and you cranked it, and the stitches came out. It was so much fun that all the boys came in and we sewed doll clothes together. We didn't play with dolls, but we sewed, and it was great fun. So we lived in Richland until I was in the 3rd grade. From the very beginning, I loved sewing, and from the very beginning when I was a little girl, all I could think of was I wanted to go to New York and design clothing. So I finished school and finished high school, went to the University of Washington, and got into the clothing, textiles, and art program, and had the most spectacular teachers that just inspired me beyond belief. You had to work to be the best you could possibly be, and I just loved it. So I just knew that I was going to finish school and go off to New York and design clothing. And then I met Chuck. I met Chuck water skiing, actually, in the summer in front of my house. I was always water skiing with my brothers and their friends, and we were out on the raft, and Chuck came by in his boat, and that's how we met. And so he was a Fiji at the U, I was a Gamma Phi. We lived almost next door to each other, and we started dating. And on my 21st birthday, Chuck was taking me out to dinner. It was going to be a wonderful evening, and I got a call from my mother and dad thinking it was going to be, congratulations, you're 21, and it was instead a call from my mother telling me that my dad had had a stroke and died. So my life kind of made a great big change, because no longer could we afford to, I couldn't go to college anymore because there was no money and I didn't have a job or whatever. So that darling man, Chuck said, you know, my grandfather died and left me a little bit of money. I can help you with college. Chuck was like that throughout our whole life. Everything I ever wanted to do, Janie, go for it. You gotta try it. Go for it. So the whole New York thing was gone because I was in love with Chuck, and I thought, well, I'm not gonna be a designer, but I could be a teacher. Sorry. So I got an education degree, continued on with so I got a double degree in clothing, textiles, and art, and education. And then I got a job that summer with the extension service with this fabulous woman. And I was doing nutrition. And I got caught by the nutrition bug. And this woman who was a professor, a visiting professor, said, you know, you really need to go into nutrition. And I'm going, but I was going to be a designer. But she said, no, you've got to try nutrition. So she said, I can help you get a grant. I said, I can't afford it. And she said, well, Chuck's in law school. I need to get a job. And she said, no, I can help you get a grant. So she helped me get a grant that was enough money for Chuck to go to law school and for me to study. And it was so exciting. And at Christmas time, they said, oh, we're sorry. The grant's done. And then Chuck and I decided that we really, well, another thing, Chuck got a brain tumor. And they didn't know if they could operate or how long he would live. And so we made a great decision to have children. So after 7 years of marriage, we had the cutest, most adorable Allison. Bonnie Danielson lived on the island, and we had babies. We were in the hospital together having babies, and Bonnie said, you know, you have to come to Bainbridge. And she said, I went to a birthday party at this house of a doctor and a interior designer who owned this house on Bainbridge, and it was the coolest house I've ever seen, and it's for sale. So she said, you've got to come over, and you've got to see it. So I came over, and we snuck around this house. And I fell in love. So I knew I had to leave my perfect house in the city and come out here. And so we were meant to come, and we came, and we had just purchased our first television in Seattle. And we came, of course, there was no cable. There was no cable here, and there was no reception here. So our poor children grew up without television until they were 7 and 9, I think. So we sat on the couch in the living room with a fire going, watching the livestock, rats and mice, run back and forth. This had been a summer house since 1926. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm at the end of a dirt road. I don't know anybody here except Bonnie. What am I going to do? And so what happened was Bonnie introduced me to this group of women, and so we became a quilt group. And that's how, through the quilting, I got into this piecing, this small piecing. There's a technique called Seminole patch, and the Seminole Indians used it and used strips and strips and sewed them together and cut them apart and put them in different designs. And it fascinated me of everything that I did with quilting, and I did it for 4 or 5 or 6 years, and then got onto this technique, and I thought, this is so exciting. And during that time, Chuck every year would go to a seminar in New York at NYU for his business, and so I got to go with him. So for a period of 5 or 6 years, we went to New York every summer for about 2 weeks. So I was set free every day to explore New York, and I went in every boutique. I spent all my time in Soho and Greenwich Village and that whole area, and I just was back in that dream of here I am, I'm seeing everything. I got so many ideas, and I saw someone using a serger with a thread on the outside, and I thought, oh my gosh, I could use that Seminole work and that thread on the outside, and I could sew it together and cut it apart and sew it together again, and I could come up with designs. So then when the kids were in school, I rented from Peggy and Bruce Brunton, and it was a beautiful atrium room right in front of their building. And so I had all the light you could ever want. I had a big table in the center and an easel and my sewing machine, and I could just sew to my heart's content. And I would take the kids to school, sew all day, and pick them up at night, and loved it. And my big goal was to have a show at Arts and Crafts. So I worked and worked and worked and worked and got it all ready. But for the show, every piece that I had in the show was fairly expensive because it was expensive fabric, and it took hours and hours and hours to put together. And I wasn't sure anyone would be able to afford it. So I thought, at the last minute, why don't I buy some sweatshirts and just put a swash across the front? So I bought 4 sweatshirts and made the same design that I did on the expensive clothing across the front of the sweatshirt. And the sweatshirts became my signature. And I think at one point on Bainbridge Island, I'll bet half the people on Bainbridge were wearing my clothes. I was so busy with my business, and I had the front room of Marché where everyone sits, and BPA needed a place for their offices. And so I said, why don't you guys move into the front room? So BPA moved in to the front room of Marché, and I was in the back, and we were just great friends all the time. And so I watched Susie put together this exchange with the Americans and with the Russians and take this group to Russia. And it was such a success for the adults. And they thought, let's do an artist exchange. Well, Susie said, come on, Janie, you need to come with us. And I said, Susie, I have 2 kids in school. I have a husband. I have 12 employees, and all these stores that I'm supplying. Go to Russia for 3 weeks when I'm not even interested in it? And Rick Stafford and everybody else twisted my arm until I said yes. And it changed my life. By this time, the Soviet Union had fallen, and there was a tremendous crisis with orphans in Russia. And the orphanages were just overflowing. And so the theater was trying to help. And they couldn't do a lot, but they would do birthday parties for the orphans. And so once a month they closed the theater to everyone except orphans and invited all these orphans, and they had a performance and then birthday parties for them. And it was through that Grace Church started raising money for these birthday parties, and then the Sunday school kids started being pen pals with the children from the orphanage. And that happened back and forth. And then one time I met Valentina, who was an angel. There isn't even a word for volunteer in Russian. And she was able to get her older friends who are pensioners to come in and hold these children that she found on the streets and in train stations and in empty apartments. And I'll tell you, it just broke your heart. You just couldn't even imagine it. So I said to Bill Harper, you know what, Bill? We need to take those kids to Russia to do the camp for Russian orphans, not do this pen pal thing. We need to just take them. And so Bill Harper and Rick Torsett, myself, Cassie Pica, and I think Ellen Spencer too, sat around this table for a year planning what we would do, and then we took 19 kids that next summer and did a camp for Russian orphans. And we did this for the orphans, to do something special for the orphans. And it's been going for 14 years now with a little break in between because of situations in Russia. But it's really amazing what it's done for our kids. We had a reunion last night of kids from 2001. There were probably 40 kids who came. Not everybody could come, people have moved away, but we had kids representing almost every one of those years. And all the things that they have done, how it's changed their lives, and how they saw a need and were so filled with the ability to be able to give, and that feeling that they got back, that they just want to continue giving, giving, giving. And they're doing it all over the world. There are kids all over, and I wish I could list them all off to you, and I didn't make a list of them in my mind, but it's just amazing. And to see, the other thing that's so wonderful is the kids that were chosen, the American kids that were chosen, are from all different groups that might not have even spoken to each other at high school. And not only did they learn about giving to children who needed love, but they learned about getting to know people they never would have thought of speaking to. And they are each other's closest friend now. And it just opened their lives to the world. And it is such a joy to get to be with these kids and see what they're doing. And the same wonderful learning about yourself and getting out of yourself and giving to others is coming from Camp Siberia. So the great thing, we'll have to change the name to Kitej, Camp Kitej maybe, but this ability of children to help other children and for people to learn about other cultures and other people is continuing.
For her work as a fiber artist and a designer of a cultural experience for our youth, the Bainbridge Island Arts and Humanities Council is delighted to present Janie Ekberg with this check and this trophy and welcome her as our island treasure for 2014.
Wow. Thank you, Cynthia. You did my speech for me. What an evening, and thank you all so much. Now I have to talk to you without crying, and it's really hard to look at Cynthia and Frank, and thank you for this really amazing, amazing award and evening, and thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, what an incredible honor it is to stand here tonight as an Island Treasure. I'm so flattered to be selected and so humbled to be joining a group of such inspiring, artistic, and dedicated community members. What a gift it is to live in a community that recognizes, celebrates, and supports the arts and humanities. And truthfully, it is this community that is the greatest treasure, a treasure I cherish and am forever grateful to for supporting me in my journey. I'm sorry you know a little bit of this already, but I'm going to tell you again. This journey started when I was 6 with that little black sewing machine. And Steve, I don't know where you found that picture, but that was it. It was a gift from my mother, who was concerned with my tomboy ways. I was fascinated by that machine with design and construction, texture and color. This curiosity and passion led me to a degree in clothing, textiles, and art, followed by sharing my passion with others through teaching, freelance design work, and eventually and finally to my solo show at Bainbridge Arts and Crafts. I'm so thankful to Bainbridge Arts and Crafts for believing in me and for giving me that first show from which Calliope, my clothing business, was born. Calliope would not have been the success it was without the support of a fabulous group of island women. A group that you heard first came together as a play group for our children, and then it grew into a quilt group. And this quilt group still gets together almost 40 years later. It was some of these very women, Penny Lamping, Joanne Trick, and Sandy Nakata, who became my first employees, enabling Calliope to keep up with its growing demand and unexpected success. It was a magical time, designing, creating, traveling to craft and clothing shows all over the country, and meeting other artists working hard to further their craft. At that time, I shared my studio space with another treasure in our community, Bainbridge Performing Arts. Susie Glass-Burdick, the artistic director, approached me to design costumes for Once Upon a Mattress. What a kick and delight it was to dress the red-headed queen, Denise Harris, in hot pink polka dots. Thanks to Susie, a whole new world of design and creative opportunity opened to me. For it was through Susie and her theater exchange with the Globe Theater in Novosibirsk that I was introduced to Russia. Designing and creating 180 costumes with the help of 6 amazing Russian costumers for Phantom Woman, a musical comedy on the scale of a Broadway production, was a monumental challenge and cemented my ties with Russia. What followed was an epic adventure of discovery, heartbreak, and growth. I will forever be changed by meeting Valentina, the principal of a home for abandoned children, in a ramshackle cement block building in the snowy Siberian forest outside Novosibirsk. She was struggling against all odds to provide warmth and hope for these forgotten children. My heart was broken, and I had to do something. And once again, the community stood by me with the unending enthusiasm and energy of Bill Harper, Rick Torsett, Allison Dvaladze, my daughter right here, Ellen Spencer, Cassie Pika, and a huge host of others. Camp Siberia was born, and my life took another direction. There is no way to thank you all enough for your hard work and for your dedication. Our work together has helped to change so many lives. Bainbridge, an island of dedicated and generous people, rallied to support Camp Siberia, and truly, it took a community to make this idea a reality.
From recruiting the first group of island kids to go to Russia, to finding dedicated board members, fundraisers, chaperones, and trainers. And let me tell you, it was no walk in Gorky Park. Traveling to Russia is rewarding, but anything but predictable. Despite the challenges, including the times, not once, but twice, that we were stuck in Russia when Aeroflot sold our tickets for freight, you came back for more. You are all remarkable, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Though the mission of Camp Siberia was to help the abandoned children in Russia, it's truly rewarding and humbling to follow the adventures and achievements of our island youth as they find their own ways to express commitment to volunteerism and community here at home and around the world. Jack, David, Stephanie, Graham, Lily, Bevan, I could keep going, are just a few, and I'm proud to call my camp kids. The joy of their friendships has brought me one of the greatest treasures of all. Thank you to all the amazing kids, supportive families, for this creative joy. And finally, and most importantly, I am so thankful for the support of my wonderful family. Throughout this adventure, I've had the loving support of my dear husband, Chuck, of my amazingly talented daughters, Allison and Jenny. They have been with me through every turn. They've helped me with every challenge, and they have filled my life with happiness. Sorry. And they have given me the best gift of my life, my 4 grandchildren. These children are the light of my life and the joy of my future. Bainbridge, 2 of these wonderful kids are lucky enough to grow up on Bainbridge, surrounded by all of you. And once again, I am humbled by this honor and so grateful to this community for opening new doors, for seeing potential in my dreams and supporting me in making them come true. I'm here because of you, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. I will always treasure this community. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming and celebrating Bainbridge's newest island treasures. For people that are going to stick around for the banquet, it's going to start right after this. Thank you so much for coming and celebrating these great community members that have done so much for us. So, thank you.